Good morning, good morning, good morning. I'm Robin SUTARA, Field CTO with DATABRICS. Super excited to be moderating this panel for you this morning. And so what we would love to do is get started with a little bit of questions that we prepared for the panelists, all experts. We'll have them do a quick intro, and then we will have time for, hopefully, questions at the end. So maybe with that, Di, could we go ahead and start with a quick introduction of yourself and where you work?
Good morning, everybody. This is quite micy, isn't it? I'll probably need to speak a bit quieter. I'm Di MAYZE. I'm Global Head of Data and AI for WPP.
Hi all. I'm Richard Davis. I'm the Chief Data Officer for OFCOM.
Hi, I'm NATALIE CRAMP. I'm the CEO of PROFUSION, which is the data consultancy.
Hi,
Really loud, yeah.
very loud. Andy LOLE, CTO at NETACEA. We're a bot and API security business.
Lovely. So how many in the audience have seen Game of Thrones? Anybody remember that little show on HBO? Yes. So what we have sort of thought about over the last few months, we presented at Gartner from Databricks around how are we thinking about generative AI, and we really think it's opening up almost a Game of Thrones across organizations. And I'll explain to you why that is, because during the course of the Game of Thrones, all seasons, right, what do we constantly see? We see them adapt and adjust, right? So at some point you have them fighting with each other based on geography or location. Then all of a sudden they have to collaborate and fight against the White Walkers. I'm not going to spoil the ending, I promise. Then they all sort of pull together and create this army, and the one with the biggest dragon sort of wins, yes? And so what I want you to think about during the course of today is what are the dragons and the armies and the collaborations and the connections that you're building in your generative AI strategies, particularly around your people and process, that are going to make sure that you're not the one that dies at the end of the Game of Thrones of generative AI. So with that, I would love to get started with the panelists and sort of ask, where are you? What impact is generative AI having on your organizations? And maybe could you share an example, either that's working or not working, when you're thinking about how you're landing and resonating this hype around generative AI in your organization? So Di, maybe we could start with you.
The first example I could find at WPP of using GenAI was in 2016, when we created the next Rembrandt, and it wasn't using GenAI to copy it. We deconstructed via Wunderman Thompson all the different paint strokes and the way he painted. So we have been using it for a long time, and working for a creative company, I'm really lucky because we've had millions of examples. My favorite, if I may just say, was one that was done with Dell and Intel with VML-Y&R, and it was called I Will Always Be Me. And it's because when people have motor neurone disease, they often lose their voice. And what a brilliant use case for GenAI to enable people with motor neurone disease to capture their voice. And they read this book, and then as their voice deteriorates, they get to keep a really authentic version of their voice. And here's a bit of a tearjerker. I was presenting this to a group, and a woman came up to me and she said, I'm in New Zealand and my mum has motor neurone disease, and she was able to make a speech at her daughter's wedding because of this technology. And I absolutely love that it was a campaign, but actually a really positive use case for it.
Richard, that's going to be a tough one to follow, I think.
Yeah, that's emotional.
Sorry, let's all.
So I think for us, my journey similarly, so not in OFCOM, but in a previous company, I had used a form of generative AI back in 2018. We had teams of people who are going out and auditing other companies, and they would collate a load of information and then bring that back in-house and spend about 7 to 8 hours writing up a summary of what they'd done, which was formulaic. So we played a game with our CEO called No Bot versus Robot, where we compared the AI to the auditor's output, and he couldn't tell which was which. And that was back in 2018. That resulted in us saving about 35 to 50 FTE of effort very quickly. So that meant people could go out and audit more, they could collect more information, do more in-depth analysis. In OFCOM, bit of a different situation. The generative AI revolution happened last year, and we were quite quick to say, oh, that's used, it could potentially result in a leak of our data, so let's stop people doing it. So quickly there was an internal policy to say, no, data could be put out. Since then, we've started to run a really controlled pilot scheme saying what's internal data, what's external data, what's internal models, what's external models, which ones do we use in different situations. A few examples of how we're using it. So looking at search, we're a government regulator. We have a hell of a lot of documentation. Just being able to find what's written in that is can be a bit of a nightmare at times. So trying to use this for search, for summarization, internal FAQs, that's one of the areas. Also looking at for our comms team, how they can use it for productivity purposes, so image generation, video generation, a lot of their social media outputs. But then big things that we're looking at, how we can use it for synthetic data generation, for improving our code capabilities, so how can we get faster prototypes and actually enhance people's productivity. And yeah, that, I was speaking to Robin earlier, we've got a roadmap that's going out to 2028 at the moment of our future use cases. Not all of them's going to happen. It gets fuzzy as we look out to the future, but just trying to build up that pilot program and development opportunities is big.
I'm so impressed. I think mine looks fuzzy after 6 months. So to look at 2028 and say that's where you get fuzzy, I think that's phenomenal. Natalie, what are you seeing across the clients that you work with?
So as a business ourselves, we're quite a small business, so we're really using it for efficiency. So not as tear-jerking, but very practical. Like, I think it's amazing that we all know content marketing works, but as a small organization, you could never have 4 copywriters to do it. And all of a sudden, with like a junior mid-marketing level person, we're able to do content marketing. Our coders are able to use it to teach them new coding languages. HR are able to use it to speed up writing of policies, job descriptions, those sorts of things. As a business, we train other organizations in data fundamentals, data literacy, whatever you choose to call it. And the synthetic data generation is, to really do those gamified simulations of that is another sort of really useful use case for us. In our clients, we're seeing people use it in all sorts of different ways. Though a lot of people are sort of still in the experimentation phase, as you would expect, but some HR teams using it to basically be the chatbot for the organisation, so massively reduce their admin burden of just answering all the questions. So they've fed all their policies, all their processes, all of that into it, and people are able to answer. So those sorts of sort of practical ones which people feel safe about. What we're doing a lot with clients is working on the ethics side of it and really looking at how can they make these use cases a reality, but in a way that doesn't damage customer brand and reputation.
Andy, how about at NETACEA? I know you're also on some boards, so maybe at those organizations as well, or how you're seeing it across your space.
So, yeah, within NETACEA, we're doing a lot of the things we've heard from Richard and Natalie. I think one of the areas where we're sort of slightly differentiated is natural language querying for our customers. Our data is analysing their traffic, and knowing where to look and when to look can be quite hard for them. So digging into that and that's letting them ask questions, that's an area we're experimenting with. And I think the bit where we're really quite different is on the other side of that, actually helping our customers selectively allow their sites to be scraped for the models in the first place.
Yeah.
Customers are not necessarily keen on giving up all of their IP, but they are potentially interested in feeding some of it in. So it's that level of control.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really interesting, Di and Richard, you both brought up examples of years ago where you were using generative AI into your organization. So a question I get asked a lot is this just hype? Like, is this just the next data mesh people will shoot me? Yes. Is this the next hype sort of thing? Or is it reality? Is it a revolution? Is it something that's really going to transform businesses? So maybe, Richard, could we start with you?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of both, to be honest. I think there's the capability that ChatGPT, when it launched, to be able to put that into the hands of a wider use people, like so everyone could use it. I was going to somewhere and our CEO was talking, read a poem that she got from ChatGPT, and I'm speaking to friends of mine who are the least technical of people who are suddenly using this to come up with solutions. I think that use case to widen it out is absolutely amazing. But how often do you think people are going to keep going to a chatbot? And I don't think that's necessarily the wider solution. So as we move forwards, I think we're going to see more nuanced use cases of this that might be, we're starting to see some of those with the assistance use cases, so like inflection and things like that, where you're getting more memory from a personal use case, how that features into Copilot and people being able to read their own emails. So those use cases that are using this technology and how that builds up into the future, I think will continue to grow. So maybe we won't be talking about large language models and GPTs and things like that. We'll just be seeing these applications built into every tool that we use, and we won't be thinking about that technology. In the same way we don't really think about the web technology and the internet, we just use it. Yeah. And I think that's where we'll get to in the future.
Nice. Di?
We're layering it into 3, so that the bottom of the 3 is just always the best number, isn't it? So at the bottom, it's how we use AI in our tools. So like Richard said, on just day-to-day, let's make autocorrect better, our diary management, all that stuff that I equate to the photocopier. People used to be sad that the photocopy arrived because they thought they were going to lose their jobs. So I think there's going to be a whole load of stuff that GenAI takes that, if we were really honest, we think is really dull and we don't want to do anymore. And then we're building GenAI into our tools and products. So, for example, we've been obsessing about metadata for 4 years, and we've partnered with Data.World to build a catalog, and we've integrated ChatGPT with that catalog so that you can navigate your data better. And it was something we did as a pet project, but actually it's really captured the imagination of a valid use case for text-based GenAI. I think image-based GenAI has got a long way to go from a marketing perspective. Who wants their brand that they've invested billions of dollars in to be totally massacred by a machine? So I think that's good for mood boards, but I think we're doing almost an iterative step of 3D generation before we get to using image generation.
I think whether it's hype or not, to some extent, doesn't matter because it's here. And I think all of us as data professionals have had times where it's been hard to get budget or buy-in or get people to listen to the stuff you know they really need to listen to. And actually, this is a moment where we can capitalize, even if you're sitting there thinking, my goodness, as I was training some CEOs the other day, and one of them said, do I need to build my business on generative AI? And I was trying to find a way to say very politely, you don't have a dashboard that tells you your unit economics yet. Maybe start there. I did find a polite way to say it after I'd sort of managed it in my head. But, but these were CEOs who weren't remotely thinking about it, or might have been saying to their team, can't you just put some AI on it? But probably weren't giving you the investment and the energy and the focus that you needed. And so for me, it's almost how do you use the hype to get the stuff, the fundamentals that you know in your business need doing to really happen. And if you have to wrap it in the package of generative AI is happening and you need to wake up to this, do it, because you know what needs to happen in your organization. And sometimes people don't want to invest in the fundamentals. So I think there's a use to the hype, which we could all sort of get on board with. And I think it is here to stay. And Richard's point about it being across the organization is interesting because we've lost control. And if you think, really, we used to have control of what happened with data in our organizations, it used to pretty much have to happen through the data team. And all of a sudden, we have anyone and everybody engaging with it, which is super positive. But also, you have uninformed users using this technology, and that can be a bit dangerous. And like a board member of a data company said to me, couldn't the board papers go in ChatGPT and get them to summarize it? And I said, well, yes, if you want all your confidential information to be used for training data. And, that was someone who's involved in a data company. So, we've got a lot of uninformed users out there, and that's why I think, with the use the hype to educate your organization and really drive forward the things that matter for your data strategy, because technology is a tool, not the end game.
I think you bring up an interesting point, right? It's about that skills. It's about how do we build up the capabilities within the organization, because now everyone has access to sort of this technology that before seemed really, far in distance and you could control it. So how are you guys thinking about enabling the organizations to use the technology in the ways that you sort of want to? Maybe Andy, from your team's perspective, how are you
So it's definitely here to stay. It's very easy to adopt that sort of organic growth from the ground up. So it's a lot of this, I think you've touched on this already, but it's the how to use it. Don't think experimentally. We're using Copilot tools, for example, with the development team. Get a paid account. Don't use your personal account so the information doesn't leak. You know, just thinking through the implications of that. I'm very sure that the use cases here are going to expand much further. So how can we get companies comfortable that they're not leaking their IP?
Yeah, absolutely. Intellectual property is probably the biggest question I get asked as well, right? Like nobody wants to repeat a Samsung. How do we make sure that our trade secrets aren't getting out there? So how are you guys sort of training your organizations or organizations that you consult with to set up some of those boundaries or give guidance? Di, I know you run an amazing AI academy at WPP.
Thank you.
So how are you guys integrating this into that?
So we layer it by deep skill, upskill, reskill. And we've done a lot of upskilling. So we launched our Demystify AI program in 2020. We used a digital human, so we used AI to train our people on AI to answer 19 questions in English, Spanish, and Mandarin. We partnered with the Open Data Institute, but tailored it for our own use cases for data fundamentals. We then, for deep skilling, partnered with Coursera, and we've done curated learning paths to really be respectful of our data talent and making sure if somebody is an analyst and wants to be a scientist, that we respect the different skills in the career pathway. Partnered with Oxford University to do AI for Business diploma. We've got our second cohort. And then when November came, and we say it as AI gets a UI, we knew we had to respond really quickly. So the CTO team and the legal team created a series called How to Use GenAI Responsibly and Creatively. And we wanted to do it to not ban tools, but we did recognize that some are more risky from an IP and a copyright than others. But we wanted to protect our employees because we knew they would use the tools, because we said, go get literate in these tools. So we've put some guardrails on what can be used for mood board or inspiration or a thought starter versus what should be considered a client deliverable.
Natalie, how about from your perspective?
Yeah, so I think it starts with giving the guardrails. You have to give people a framework to operate in, otherwise they're sort of in the Wild West and it's not reasonable to expect things of them. We have a data ethics advisory board, and it was quite interesting because even asking a huge number of companies through that, have you got a generative AI policy in place? Some people were like, it's in the works, and most people hadn't got it in place and communicated yet. And we're actually, quite far on from this really hitting the mainstream. So policy isn't the whole answer, but you do sort of have to start there to know what framework you're operating in. I think you also have to really clearly communicate your strategy, because you're using the technology to help you deliver your strategy. Your strategy probably hasn't changed. The way you get there might have changed. And if you don't really communicate your strategy, you can spend a lot of time doing very expensive experiments that don't really help you. And people can be using it for things that aren't necessarily helpful to the organization. But alongside that, I think you have to create those innovation use cases. So again, you've got a bit of a framework, but do some brainstorms, understand the stuff that you'd love to test out, and let people go and be curious and have a play. Because this is new and this is interesting, and they need to see how it can work. And then from a training perspective, we very much see it as a sort of three-pronged attack. So you've got to get your leaders trained. These are the people signing off the budgets. These are the people asking the questions. These are the people normally causing the heads of data problems by not asking the right questions. If you don't train at the top, you're not going to get it working in the organization. So really helping them to get it, getting data fundamentals into the whole organization. And I mean, in some organizations, that looks like a sheep dip of 3 hours for the whole staff. In others, that looks like a massive gamified program in lots of different languages running across a year, and then with refreshers and new content every year. And it depends on your organization and on your use cases and what you're trying to achieve as to what you might pick. And then the third piece, never to forget, is the data teams. We spend time training data teams on the business fundamentals to make sure that those three connect and speak the same language and can really drive this forward as a united front. And that's where we see the real value of data, AI come into life in the organization, because people will make or break your transformation. They're pretty much 80% of the defining factor of whether it will work. And yet we are very happy to spend money on the technology. We're very happy to spend money on the technical skills. And we always forget the transformation process. Get a comms person in your team, do the training. It costs you a hell of a lot less than you're spending with all those vendors who are out there.
Hey, no. You can spend money with the vendors.
You can do both, you can do both. But the point is you will spend that for the tech, so why wouldn't you spend it on the people?
Absolutely, absolutely. Richard, you talked about OFCOM, completely locking it down and now sort of making this evolution to, how are you enabling the people to, be able to use the technology now that you're starting to open up with these guardrails?
Yeah, and I think there's probably a few different steps within that, and it's, I saw a fantastic meme a month or so ago where someone was on a bottom step and leaning 4 steps up to jump up the stairs, and on the bottom step it said where we are now, and on the top step it said GenAI, and on each step it said data fundamentals, data training, data platform, because you can't just skip over everything to be able to get there. What we've seen from our side, our board is very excited by it. We've just, the online safety bill's just gone through its final stage in Parliament, and there's a large part within that where we need to understand what AI, not just Gen AI, but the wider AI use cases are. So we've been upskilling our board on what algorithms mean, what algorithmic assessment means, what AI is, and then more recently upskilling our board on what Gen AI is. But within that, they're then saying, okay, but how can we use this internally for us to become more efficient, more proactive, become a more proportional regulator? And absolutely, there's use cases within that, but fundamentally, we need to pull this back and say, well, where is our governance, our AI, our ethics, and make sure that we've got all of those fundamentals in place and understood by the organization. We're looking at education. That's a key pillar of our data strategy, which we now have buy-in because the board wants to see these future use cases. Within that, we've got a T-bar strategy where we have a data literacy program that's going out to everyone within the organization. It's got different use cases depending on whether that's the senior management team, where we're trying to do more in-depth in-personal sessions, through to online courses that we're working through that everyone will be taking. Then we've also got the data professionals training, where we have skills and specialisms and taking people through specific programs so they can upskill themselves and see their future career journey. And the third stage of this is then moving on from that platform side to say, where is the platforms, where's the future use cases? How do we enable people to use the technology that they've just learned about, that they've signed off from a governance and ethics place, to be able to use these tools in their everyday life? And it very much for us is about making sure that everyone is able to use this, but in a way where they're coming from it from an educated point of view, and to make sure we've got the governance and ethics in place to be able to use the tools effectively.
Yeah. How are you dealing with people within the organization that don't want to change, right? Like, my partner is a software developer, and absolutely, I am never using a co-pilot or assistant. I can write that code way better than that can. Andy, how are you thinking about enabling your engineers and your teams to think outside the box as you're trying to take them on this journey?
I think initially it's about encouragement, but they don't have to. If they don't want to, it's not a problem. But what we are seeing is colleagues, relationship between sort of marketing team and engineering team, for example, has built up, because the marketing team, exactly to your point, are looking at expanding their capabilities, creating a lot more product marketing content, and want to know more about how it's doing it. Should they be worried about their job? So we're seeing sort of almost a relationship building thing coming out of this. I think where you've got engineers who don't want to use the tools, this is an accelerator. If we look at what Photoshop, for example, did to photography, it broadened out who could get involved. And I think we'll see the same thing. People can resist or get on board.
Yeah.
I think the ones who get on board will accelerate.
We're definitely seeing a pace of innovation, I think, that's unheard of by leveraging the tools in the right way internally. I mean, if we look at DataBricks, for example, as a company, what we announced at our Data and AI Summit in July was phenomenal. at the pace of innovation of the products and capabilities that we released. And I think a lot of that could be attributed to our CEO saying, we will leverage generative AI internally to make our products better and innovate faster. And so, from a WPP perspective, how are you guys thinking about, especially in creative? Don't get me wrong, I went to an event last week where doom and gloom, the world's ending, it's all on fire, right? Creatives going away and going to die. True Game of Thrones, right?
Oh yeah, it's not feeling like the White Walkers coming to WPP. I mean, we built a data and AI community in 2020. My role is entirely on influence, not power. There are 6 people in my team. We stand on the shoulders of giants, which are our agencies. But I wanted to create a platform where they could all come together, be vulnerable in their lack of literacy in data and AI. So we have talks, we have competitions, we have chat, share random articles. So that's been in flight. Our CEO is absolutely supportive of the role of AI and creativity. And in a slightly blunt way, we say to everyone, you're not going to lose your job to AI. You're going to lose your job to someone who uses it. And that, I think, is a really important difference. We don't know what shape our organisation's going to be, but actually we want to take everybody with us, but the organisation will change.
We had a creative industries breakfast last week, which was really interesting, people from all sort of around the sector. And I think people are fearful, but they also see some opportunity. And I think that as an industry, it's trying to learn the lessons from previous innovations, you know, Napster, Amazon. You don't want to be beholden to these technologies and to these huge companies. So if you're not prepared to get on board and at least understand it and work out how you can use it, then you will, you know, change is the only constant for us all, right? And I think for people who struggle with that, you do sort of have to cite previous innovations, like, you know, this idea that we wouldn't use generative AI in schools. Well, we use calculators in schools, and that would have seemed really odd years ago. So why would you, they're going to use generative AI in the jobs when they come out, why would we not let them use it in schools? So I think it's just sort of really citing some of those examples, and not in an aggressive way to people, but really thinking, like, maybe running a reflection session on, let's look back at the different innovations in our industry. How did we respond? What did we learn from that? What was good about that? What was bad about that? How do we respond to this one as effectively as possible to win the Game of Thrones and not be the one that's killed at the end?
Absolutely. Richard, how are you thinking about application to your data team? Because we've talked about new roles, these prompt engineers that are now being advertised. Like, what does that mean for an organization?
So I think, just to bring it back to the Game of Thrones, as
I love
Daenerys was flying over from the narrow seas with her dragons, the native population, the White Walkers, could have looked at that and said, this is a new technology that's coming in, and been scared of it. But actually, they embraced it. They turned one of those dragons into one of their own, and they had a white dragon, and it was fascinating. I see this as what Di said in terms of, you're not going to lose your job to AI. You're going to lose your job to the person who uses AI. And I kind of look back to when I code, and I've always got 2 screens. One screen has got Stack Overflow on it, and the other one I've got the editor. And I'm constantly like copying and pasting from other people's code on Stack Overflow, a bit here, a bit there. Okay, now let's pull it together and add my little nuances to it. What's the difference between a computer that does all of that bit for me and just suggests something? I'm not going to say it's going to be the best code. It's not going to be the most efficient code. It might not do what I want it to do, but it's going to give me a suggestion and some way to move forward. And I think that use case to be able to say, how do I become more efficient in my coding, is going to help people to become better coders, to be able to use it. And I think my team see that. But I also look, so this isn't the first time that I've seen this AI and people worried about how it might take jobs. So I had a team, and we had a fraud investigation team, and they were doing a lot of very manual processing, where a number of systems that they had to use to record a fraud, to report it, to close an account, to give money back, and it was all very manual copying and pasting, and that process took about 20 to 30 minutes. over thousands of fraud, you're then talking potential fraud cases, about 30 to 50 people effort every year. We went in and we automated that process. And I went to the site where this was and speaking to the team, and I was really worried, thinking, oh God, they're going to think I've taken their job away. And I'm like, how do you see the AI, the robot coming in? And they're like, it's been brilliant. I said, what? Tell me more. And they said, because it's taken over the manual things, we're now standing up and talking to other teams. We're investigating the more complex fraud. We're speaking to other people that we never thought we'd speak to. We're using more complex things, and we're doing the thing that people are good at. And weirdly, the AI, the robots, had given them their humanity back because they're now going out and speaking to other people and doing the more complex jobs. If we can get rid of all the mundane stuff and give people the opportunity to be more humane at the end of it, that's a really good opportunity that GenAI can give us.
Absolutely. So I'll open up to questions in the audience, but before we do that, I would love for each of you to share is this your dragon or a White Walker dragon, right? Are you thinking that it's going to benefit your organization, or are you more concerned about the risk that it presents to the organization?
Definitely a benefit.
Definitely on balance benefit.
Benefit.
Oh, yeah.
So with that, I would love to open it up for questions from the audience. I think people have microphones. So does anybody have a question you'd like to present to this panel? You're all ready to use AI completely. People and process are all ready to go. Here we go.
Hi. Thanks very much for a very interesting start to the day. Things that change the world in the future are never the things that you think are going to change them at the time. So given what you know about GenAI and how your teams are using it and your agencies are using it, what do you actually think is going to be the lasting change that we maybe don't know now that it will cause?
Shall I go on, Natalie? You go.
Yeah. You go.
All right. I mean, I can't say it's not something that I can see happening because I've given it thought, but I'd love to see the death of the CV. They're really boring, aren't they? And they're biased, and it's created a workforce that isn't reflective of the skills or opportunities. So I'd love to see a whole movement of people being able to tell their stories and their values. And given that robots are going to be doing the selection, I think that's an area where we need to speak their language rather than try and train them to speak ours. So I say, goodbye CV, hello people, neurodiverse, more diversity in, and it being easier to match people on their skills and who they are with a role.
I think the risk, to put a negative slant on this, is we are training all of this on biased data. And so my concern, my quite great concern about this, is we could really sort of set ourselves back from an inclusive society, from a diversity inclusion point of view. And we've done so much work and we're still so far from being there that it is an equal society for everyone to operate in and everyone feel included in. And a lot of our historic data that is being used for these models has the inherent biases of our current generation, our previous generations, and those sort of societal structures that people have been working hard to break down. And so I think it's sort of incumbent on us all to work very, very hard to make this a positive change and to make sure that the lasting impact isn't this sort of two-tier society that almost regresses us. So I think that's really, really important. You know, there are still people who don't have a computer. There are still people in our society who don't have a phone. And it's really important that we don't just look at this sort of in the room as businesses as, okay, how do we use this to make us faster, better, stronger, etc. But actually, how can this technology bring everybody into a more digital inclusive world? And I think we've got a long, long way to go on that. So I suppose that's the worry of the future. I do a lot of work in health, women's health, and I am very, very optimistic about the lasting change this technology can make in healthcare, the speed at which we might be able to get diagnoses which mean that we are much more likely to survive, which mean we are much less likely to have mental health conditions. And so the lasting change I would love to see is the transformation this can make, because we all see the burden on our healthcare system that doesn't quite work. And I think this could be something that could really, really help stop that being a problem and enable us all to live longer, healthier lives.
I love that, the risk versus the reward out of it. Thank you. We have... I promised them I wouldn't dance between questions.
Thank you. This has been a fantastic panel. Whenever we see like big changes in history, there's always jobs go away and new jobs come around. So my question is, what new jobs, new roles do you think, you predict that will be seen in the next coming years that don't exist today?
We're already seeing it with prompt engineers, which fundamentally is writing good questions. You know, I think to the last question, the most likely change from all of this is acceleration of what's happening. We can move faster. What that actually means, digital artists, so the prompt engineering around creating good imagery, etc. I'm not sure it's super clear yet what will come, but I'm very confident it will come.
I think we'll see an expansion of our sort of cybersecurity teams and those sorts of roles in the same way as we saw ethical hackers be introduced. I don't quite know what the role will be, but there are going to be those sorts of roles that we're going to need to combat the sort of potential risks that come with this. I think one of the really exciting opportunities for our data teams is I hope we will see more diverse data teams, because that, you know, we will hopefully be recruiting from the social sciences as well as from the STEM subjects, because actually that ability to be able to translate what the business, what the organisation, what the charity, whoever they are, need, your stakeholders, and deliver that with whichever tech tools you use, and then be able to play that back and really get it put into action so that it's moving whatever your mission is forward. Those are going to be those skills, so those communication, those sort of applied skills, which you really see where people have done the sort of PPE type, social science type degrees. And I think if we can bring those together with the really strong technical skills, we'll hopefully see much more diverse data teams. And you know, diversity is a commercial imperative. It's not just a moral thing. Like, if we're going to combat some of those challenges around bias, we need diverse teams. And let's be honest, we don't have them yet. So I'm hoping it will bring sort of more diverse backgrounds into our data teams in the roles that we have.
So I think from my side, some of the new roles, I think it goes back to some of the other questions. The technology is going to enable human nature for all of its goods and all of its bads. And we're already starting to see how the generative AI was used for scams and improving that. We've seen how it's been used for child sex abuse material to be able to generate more of this. And we're only going to see more of that kind of the worst things of society happening. And I think trying to then find ways to be able to counter that and the new roles that needed to be able to counter that. So how do people understand what are deep fakes and to be able to understand what are fake images, what's real, and that new skill set that's required within that. I think alongside this as well, I think when internet and everything that happened to be able to proliferate some of the technology, you saw some of the forensic auditing and forensic accounting to be able to understand deep systems. I think you're going to need to see the same. How does this system actually work? We don't know. It's generated really quickly. We've just thrown huge computer power at it, but we don't know what's generating those results. Over time, we're going to need to get a lot better at understanding how that works. Those are skills that don't really exist yet, but they're going to have to be in place because we're seeing the AI summit that's coming this year where the world is converging down in Bletchley Park to discuss what the future of this technology looks like and how we can make sure that we have safe systems. When that happens, that's going to proliferate more regulation, more capabilities to understand how the systems are being used. Those are skills that don't exist at the moment, or if they do, they're in tiny pockets. But we're going to have to grow that very quickly to say, what are these systems, how are they working, and how do we report that back to boards, ethics committees, our customers on how we're using data and how the systems are there.
We talk a lot about humans in the loop, and I haven't seen any examples of that deconstructed, and I think that's going to be deconstructed using a lot of the skills you've just talked about. So maybe you heard it here first. Maybe someone in 5 years' time will be chief human in the loop or chief human after the loop. But I think actually deconstructing that on where people are checking. I quite fancy being chief human in the loop.
I was going to say, that's got to be your next career path, no doubt. If you could all take a few minutes, thank you so much for joining us at the start of day 2. If you could please join me in thanking this amazing panel for sharing their perspectives, their point of view.
Thanks, Robin.
Thank you very much. Have an amazing Big Data London day 2.